Hey friends. Okay, hopping on today to talk about what if your clients say that your price is too high. I know that's a big fear for a lot of copywriters, and as we know, of course, there is no, it breaks everybody's heart, there's no exact science when it comes to coming up with your prices, because every client is different, every project is different, all that kind of stuff. I wish there were an exact science. I wish there were a perfect formula that would work every time, but there just isn't. However, this fear that, what if I offer, or what if I quote a rate and my client says that or my would-be client says it's way too high. I think a lot of people worry about that, and it's I don't want to say unfounded because that's not fair, but I think it happens a lot more rarely than a lot of people think. I also want to remind you of an episode of the Build Your Copywriting Business podcast with Susie Tomanchuk, who is a negotiation expert, so definitely go check out that episode. But the episode is about negotiation, but one of the things she says is no is not the end of a conversation, it is the starting point of a conversation. Because when someone says, because first of all, I think that's specifically the fear, is that people are going to say that my rates are too high. And the internal fear we have is that we fear that we're not worth the rates that we quote, right? So we tend to undercut our quotes. We tend to if we go one way or the other, we tend to offer to charge less than we should, when that's not the way to go either. Figure out your rates, and our students know that there is no perfect formula, but there's a good place to start to figure out a ballpark rate. It's something we teach in the CCA, but something that I want you to think about is that even if you quote a price to a potential client and they say, that doesn't work for us, because very few people are going to be like, your prices are too high. That's that voice in our heads that makes us think that someone is going to say, that's that voice in our head that says, your prices are too high, you're not worth it. Remember, just because you think it doesn't mean that it's true. Don't believe everything you think. No client is going to be like, your prices are too high, you're not worth it, you're a terrible person. It just doesn't happen. But a client might say, well, actually I don't think that's going to work for us. Okay, this is something that you can work with. If they say, well, I don't think that's going to work for us, then you say, okay, well, what was your budget for the project? Now, here's the key. You do want to have an idea of what the lowest price you would be willing to do this project for is. Go back through your numbers and say, okay, this is a reasonable rate, and that's the rate that I gave them. But if push comes to shove, I'd really be willing to do it for this rate. Any lower, and I'm not going to be happy with it. It's not going to make sense for me, but I'm willing to do it for, this is the lowest rate I would do. So, because you want to know that, right? You want to know what is reasonable for you and just what isn't reasonable. And so when a client says, well, it's not going to work for us, and you come back and you say, okay, well, what is your budget for this? And they tell you what their budget is. Then you immediately know if it's higher than your base rate, the lowest you'd be willing to go. If it's higher than that, you can say, okay, well, that is a little bit lower than I would normally do this work for, but I'm excited about this project, and I'd really like to work with you as a client, so I can do it for that price. Great, then you turn that no into a yes, and they're ready and you're off to the races. Or if on the other hand, you figure out your lowest possible rate and they come back in and their budget is lower than that, you've already figured out what the lowest price you're willing to do the work is. If they come in below that, the answer is easy. It's just not going to work for you. You've already figured out that this is your lowest price. To do it for any less is just not going to work for you. So then you just simply say, oh, okay, I absolutely understand. Unfortunately, it's just not going to work for me to do the work at that price. But I hope we get an opportunity to work together in the future. Or you could say, well, it's just not going to work for me to do the work at that price. If you'd like, I can come up with a couple of different options that strip out some of the elements of this project, but I could still do some work for you within that budget. Is that something you want to talk about? Right? And then you're continuing the conversation, because it may be that they don't necessarily need all of those elements immediately. But they first know oh no, it's not going to work for us. That's it's just the beginning of a conversation. I think a lot of people think of no. And first of all, people aren't going no. They say, well, that's not really gonna work for us. It's just the beginning of a conversation. And yes, the end of the conversation may be that it's just they just want to pay a lot less than it works for you to do. That happens, right? But there are so many other potential clients in the world. It's not actually in the long run a huge deal, a big deal, a big problem. But it also may be that it's an opportunity for you to talk a little bit more with this client, and maybe there is a price that works for both of you, or maybe you can amend this project a little bit and to do some work for them that fits within their budget. That's still a good solution for them, but isn't the full bells and whistles that you would have initially recommended. And maybe too, if you break it into phases, they can make their budget work with that kind of thing. That is always a possibility. Make it a conversation. No should just be the beginning of a conversation. But to circle all the way back to the beginning, what if clients say your price is too high? First of all, if a potential client actually said to you, your prices are too high, ooh, you dodged a bullet there. That is not the kind of person that you want to work with. Absolutely not. If they are that nasty when they were just talking to you originally, that is not someone you want to work with. But secondarily, the chances of someone actually saying that to you are very, very slim. That's what that negative voice in our head says. That's what the negative voice in our head is fearing that people are going to say. And remember, just because we're thinking it doesn't mean that somebody else is going to say it. We are a lot harder on ourselves in our brain than the rest of the world often is. Don't believe everything you think. Just be prepared to go into the conversation with your client and actually have a conversation. Be a partner, be a professional, and have confidence in what you have to offer. That's all there is to it, which I know is easier said than done, but once you start doing it regularly and once you start conversing with clients regularly, you're actually going to discover that it's not as scary, it's not as painful, it's not as hard as you think it is. Everything is so scary and so hard until we do it, and then, oh, okay, I did that, and I can do it again, and I can do it again, and again, and again, and again throughout your career. So that's what I have for you today. No is just the beginning of the conversation. Again, if you haven't, go search the Build Your Copywriting Business podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, all that kind of stuff. And check out that episode with Susie Tomanchuk. I forget exactly what episode it is, but if you look for the Build Your Copywriting Business podcast and you look for the negotiation episode, you're going to love it. She's so smart. There was a lot of stuff that Kate and I, as we were interviewing her, were like, oh, wow, that's good. So I think you'll really enjoy it.